Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature as it's turning a lot colder over the course of the next 5 days as easterly winds do come in for the end of this week into the weekend. Temperatures will be held in around the mid to low single digits in the day and night, if not getting below freezing overnight where we see clearer skies. It will be turning quite a bit drier, but there will still be showers in the east with that easterly wind. We'll then have a look at the longer range, look at the GFS, GEM, ECMWF and the ensembles, as it's looking highly likely now we'll be seeing the coldest start to the winter, i.e. December, since 2010. The December to remember, where we were plunged into bitterly cold conditions for numerous days and numerous weeks throughout that month, and it's looking likely we're going to be starting quite cold this coming December as well. Perhaps not quite on that scale from the current model output, but it could get to that sort of level of cold. The big thing with this potential colder spell is how prolonged it could be. It's not just a cold snap of 2 or 3 days coming in from the north, or an easterly blast, or even something like the beast from the east in 2018 where it was about 4 or 5 days. This could be something that lasts a number of weeks in terms of generally colder than average conditions. And once we do get properly cold air in, it could really prolong at the surface. And even when upper air temperatures recover, the surface conditions could remain very cold. Now, for example, this weekend the upper air temperatures are going to be quite cold, around -5, -6 degrees at 850 HPA, but it's not going to be incredibly cold at the surface because we're coming off quite a mild autumn, and the North Sea is still very mild, so the air is getting moderated quite a lot towards the surface. But if we saw those -5 to -10 isotherm stay over the top of us for a good week to maybe 10 days, like it's looking likely, then that air will cool down considerably, and it's looking likely as we head around that sort of 10th of December point, we could be seeing many areas stuck at those low single digits throughout the day, even when the upper air temperatures are not particularly exceptionally cold. And it could, of course, when we get those cold temperatures, it could bring the associated wintry risk as well. It's looking likely in the north, we're definitely going to be seeing some snow within the next week or so. For the south, less likely, because of course we're further away from the colder air masses, got more of a milder influence from the south, and we'll just have to see over the course of the next couple of weeks. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now, if you start on the live radar again, you can see it's a reasonably dry day. There will be a few showers around, and weather fronts are going to try and push in from the west over the course of the next few days, and it could give a bit of rain for Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, but it should be stalling because of the Scandinavian high that is building in at the moment, building in an easterly wind. Now that precipitation will be moving away, and eventually will all go quite a bit drier, and then at the east coast by the course of later this week into the weekend could be seeing a number of showers that could turn wintry for a time over higher ground and overnight, with a bit of evaporative cooling in the heavier spells. Could be a bit of wintriness within those, but generally rain showers, cold rain, the temperatures in around that sort of 3 to 5 degree range in the day and also overnight. It's going to be turning a lot colder. And if we do have a look at the temperatures as around midday, you can see it is remaining quite cold across the central belt of the British Isles, and that is because we've got a bit of fog lingering across parts of southern Wales, into Yorkshire, northern England and Scotland. See still some lighter blues there indicating low single digits, and that's where we've got some fog, and that could also be an issue coming up as well. Whenever we see some higher pressure building in and some drier weather, we could see some fog and frost prolonging all day potentially. That could be a real risk as well. But these yellows you're seeing along the coasts, those will be reducing quite significantly later this week. I wouldn't be surprised if we could see sort of persistent blues and lighter blues, and maybe even some pinks and purples showing temperatures below -10 coming up over the course of the next couple of weeks. Now, if you go over to the UKV and have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, again, we're not expecting anything exceptional for the next 5 days. It's that sort of 10-day range where we've still got those bitterly cold charts, and of course the upper air temperatures are going to be cold coming later this week, but as I said at the start of the video, the surface conditions coming off a mild autumn, of course a very warm summer, and the North Sea still being very warm for at least this time of year, still in sort of in the teens, or double digits at least, it will mean that air does get moderated towards the surface, and we'll need continued bouts, number of days of this colder air mass to see cooler conditions, or a lot cooler conditions really. Now you go through today, you see generally drier, and that weather front bumping into the west over the course of the next day or two. Again, not producing a lot of rain really, because it's coming up against the higher pressure, sort of fizzling out, and sort of eventually just really dies away, and you can see the weather front just stays away. And then as we head into Friday, look at that, showers into the southeast. That's the easterly wind arriving, and a lot colder air mass pushing in. Again, not ridiculously cold yet, because as I said, the surface conditions are still quite mild, but upper airs is turning a lot colder, and those easterly winds are pushing in. You can see a bit of windiness over Scotland, northern hills, and you couldn't even rule out low-lying areas, perhaps even into the southeastern parts of Kent, where we're over 100, 200 metres, with about a bit of evaporative cooling overnight. Now you can see, look at the upper air temperatures, look at that, bitterly cold. You can see -5, -6 degrees at 850 HPA, really quite cold. Again, this would be cold enough for snow, but of course, as I said, the surface conditions are just too mild at the moment. And we'll just have to wait another few days for those surface conditions to cool down, to see any winteriness to anywhere except hills, and of course in some heavier spells with evaporative cooling. Look at the dew points as well, still hovering just above freezing, and again that will prohibit any wintry risk. We need to see those dew points drop below freezing to see anything snowy really, but of course they are dropping quite considerably compared to right now, where they are more in sort of the mid-single digits for many areas, where it's freezing at the moment, so we've got that fog, and of course over higher ground, it's generally sort of 4, 5, 6 degrees at the moment. We'll be getting down to sort of 1 degree towards the weekend, and as the temperatures generally cool down into next week, that will be dropping towards freezing, and then we bring in the associated wintry risk. If you look at the max temperatures over the course of the next few days, again you can see early this morning where we have those freezing fog areas, really quite cold, that below freezing, elsewhere more towards the mid-single digits, and you can see today across the afternoon, widely sort of 5 to 7 degrees, quite a cold day incoming, really nothing to shout home about, and this is going to be pretty mild compared to what we're going to have coming up over the next couple of weeks. As we head through tonight, again, frost in the north, further southwards more towards 5 or 6 degrees, and into tomorrow afternoon you see those temperatures once again rising maybe 6, 7 or 8, and again in the north hovering above or hovering around freezing really. Some areas in the north I doubt we're going to be getting much above freezing for the next couple of weeks. It's going to be bitterly cold. We're going to see a lot of sort of permafrost for some areas, and we're going to be seeing quite a lot of snowfall as well. But again, that's not in the 5-day time frame. That's sort of the 5 to sort of 15-day time frame at the moment. As we head through Wednesday night, you can see again temperatures dropping to around freezing overnight, and for the 1st of December, it's going to be quite a cold day. Temperatures max 5 to 8 degrees, 8 degrees at best, more likely 5 or 6, and maybe 10 degrees across parts of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, with that weather front trying to push in, bringing slightly milder air. But for the most of the British Isles, it's going to be quite cold. As we head into the 2nd of December, so Friday, overnight temperatures dropping down to the low single digits, and by Friday afternoon, look at that again, 5 to 7 degrees, really quite chilly, and into Saturday, overnight temperatures once again in the mid to low single digits, and the daytime temperatures don't recover all too much, 5 to 7 degrees really, at a max, more likely 4 to 6, so looking quite cold, and again, these are the actual temperatures. These do not take into the factor of wind chill, which will make the feel-like temperatures more like 1 or 2 degrees. So yeah, it doesn't look too bad on these, or doesn't look particularly cold really compared to sort of freezing temperatures from the 2 meter temperatures, but it's going to really feel cold with that wind chill. And as we head towards Sunday evening, look at that. Whatever we see clearer skies, which are more likely in the north and the west, dropping down towards freezing. So yeah, turning quite a bit colder into the weekend. Now, if you go into the longer range, have a look at the GFS, GEM and ECWF, and then of course the ensembles, we have to see the evolution of this. Blocking and generally colder weather is on all of the models and ensemble members. It's just how it comes about, how wintry it gets and how cold it gets, and where the rain snow line will be. We're going to be seeing inevitably with the Greenland high low pressures trying to run up from the south, and where that dividing line is between the milder air in the south and that bitterly cold air coming out of the Arctic, there we will see considerable snowfall. Some of the runs today are suggesting that could be in parts of England and Scotland potentially. Now, if we do run through the GFS today, you can see the higher pressure building in at the moment, easterly winds coming in, quite a cold air mass pushing in from the east, but again, nothing too exceptional. We can see about the -5 line moving in, look at the temperature deviation, maybe 4 to 6 degrees below average, and the potential equivalent. It is cold, but nothing ridiculously cold, really, in compared to what could be coming over the next couple of weeks. Just generally chilly, cold enough for snow over higher ground. As we progress beyond that into the middle of next week, you see the winds veer more northeasterly. That's a colder direction. And initially the air's not going to be ridiculously cold, but we could start to drag in some real cold air from the northeast. Now, as I said, you've got to watch these lows running up from the south. That caused Storm Emma back in 2018. Following the beast from the east, or the breakdown of the beast from the east, and that caused huge amounts of snowfall, red snowfall warning. Here, you see the low pressure run up from the south, trying to bring milder air in, colliding with this bitterly cold air coming out of Scandinavia. And where's that rain snow line? It's across northern England, into parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. Here, you'd be expecting huge amounts of snowfall in the longer term. In this scenario, southern England would be cold, but nothing ridiculous and no snow. And it's all because of the positioning of the blocks. If you're looking this in southern England, you're like, oh, I want some snow, and this chart's not showing any. Don't worry too much. This is just generally one of these charts where things were shifted 100 miles eastwards or southwards. All of the UK would be in the very cold air with the snow. So it's just something to keep an eye on, but this is the sort of pattern that could produce very cold and very wintry weather as we head towards that sort of day 10 to day 14 time frame. But once again, the GFS is very cold today. Huge block up towards Greenland. Again, very reminiscent of December 2010. If you go over to the GEM and have a look at what that is showing over the course of the next 10 days, again, easterly winds coming in at the moment, really quite cold conditions. The high pressure retrogresses up towards Greenland, and we do see nothing ridiculously cold from the GEM today. A very cold pattern, but the wind veering more east to southeasterly, actually dragging up some milder air from southeast Europe. Now, it'd still be colder than average. It just wouldn't be cold enough for any wintry conditions, really. It's quite an unusual chart, because if we do have a look at the Northern Hemisphere view, you'd expect, with this huge Greenland block, to see a lobe of polar vortex drop out towards Scandinavia and influence the UK. But instead, we're seeing higher pressure. So it's a very bizarre sort of chart, this, with all the cold air getting shoved to the other side of the pole with very little resistance. So perhaps I would expect, in reality, to see some of these blues and purples positioned more towards Scandinavia, influeing the UK a bit more, whereas here we've got really no cold air available at all. So even if this did go more east to northeasterly instead of southeasterly, there's really no cold air there at all. So a little bit of an unusual chart from the GEM in terms of air masses, but the general blocking and pressure levels is exactly what we've been seeing, and this would produce some of the biggest blocking we've seen in a number of years, and in December, since really the December to remember in 2010. Extreme conditions we're seeing on the charts again today. If you do look at the ECMWF and see what that is showing over the course of the next 10 days, you just saw there a sneak peek of what's showing at day 10, bitterly cold northeasterly winds. So you can see the high pressure building in at the moment, easterly winds coming in, generally colder air mass before that high pressure retrogresses up towards Greenland. We veer more northeasterly, and it could go milder for a time, very briefly in the south, where we do see some slightly milder air bumping in, but that could produce snowfall across the Midlands there eventually, though a northeasterly comes in, bitterly cold air, and again, only the -5 line gets through, maybe -7, -8, because it's coming from a much colder direction. Those dew points are lower, and of course we've had a number of days of colder than average conditions, so the surface conditions are going to be much colder as well. And this ECMWF chart would be bitterly cold and would be snowy as well. You can see some milder air getting wrapped in that colder air. That could spin up a little low that sort of tracks round the UK, again giving us snowfall. So we can not only see convective snowfall of a north or easterly wind, but we could also be seeing frontal snowfall with this as well. If we do get that cold locked in towards the surface and generally cold upper air conditions, even if we did see a bump of milder air at the upper levels, as long as those dew points stay below freezing, we could see some big frontal snowfall with this. So that is something to keep an eye on in the longer term. But as you can see today, all three models, huge Greenland block, cold conditions generally and potentially very cold conditions. This is some of the most extreme winter charts that we've seen in actual winter, really, since maybe the Beast from the East, and before that, getting towards that December to remember time, really. Of course, we have seen some severe northern blocking and some easterly winds into springtime, March, April time, when the polar vortex is a lot weaker and these sort of big amplifications are easier to get, and we do see this quite often, and they do produce very cold conditions, but in the time where the solar radiation is very high, it's very difficult to get any prolonged colder weather. This, even though the upper air temperatures are not ridiculously cold, a -5 isotherm moving in at this moment can give us extremely cold conditions if it stays in for a prolonged period, because the solar radiation is so low. Our day lengths are very low as well, sort of sunset at sort of half, 3, 4 p.m. in some areas, so it does mean those temperatures could be extremely low over the course of the next couple of weeks, and we could see some real locked-in cold weather. And we can see this emphasised by looking at the ensembles. Look at that. Over the course of the next few weeks, even with some milder outliers and a lot of scatter, we stay below average until the 15th of December. Going very cold towards the sort of 3rd to 5th of December next week with some very good consistency. Then we see a brief milder bump there, and that could be where that low pressure runs in from the south, trying to give us milder air, but still the majority keep us on the cold side of that in London. And then in the longer term, we stay very cold. Some milder runs, but most well below average, and most getting towards that sort of -6 to -8 degree range, which would be cold enough for widespread snow, even to low-lying areas in the south. Now, if we have a look at the 2-meter dew points, again, look at that trending towards freezing over the next couple of weeks. Again, scatterbrain at slightly above freezing at times, but most very cold. You can see those getting down to -5 or -10 in the longer range. That is ridiculously cold. Arctic air masses moving in, and would mean anything falling out of the sky would be falling as snow. It would be bitterly cold. And you look at the 2-meter temperatures, look at that trending very cold over the course of the next couple of weeks. Now it's like 8 or 9 degrees. Come next week, maybe only 4 or 5 in London, and that is, of course, London is sort of a warmer zone. In the countryside, further northwards, it'll be a couple of degrees colder than this, and generally in the long term, even with milder outliers and colder outliers into it, our average is around 4 or 5 degree day highs, and overnight temperatures will be touching most likely on the low single digits, if not towards freezing and below that, where we see clearer skies. So again, turning really cold in the longer term. And something we'll be keeping an eye on is the new snow depth spikes, showing snow potentially falling, and you can see some maybe in London in around a week's time, and then more consistency in the longer term. But again, no point looking at those beyond the next sort of 3 or 4 days, and they are just good to indicate when the air is conducive of snow and when precipitation is in the forecast as well. That's something that we're not looking at the moment, and that'll be something to look at probably maybe later this week into the weekend and start of next week, once those cold air masses get in and once the general pattern is sort of more locked in. We definitely know there's big Greenland blocking coming in, but exact air masses, exact wind direction, and areas of low pressure, that is something we still need to decipher. If you have a look at Glasgow as well, this is an even more extreme example. You can see in the north, being close to those cold air masses, closer to the block, you can see the temperatures are more consistent actually, down to -5 level for perhaps 10 days consistently there. Extremely cold conditions, and you'd be expecting to see quite a bit of snowfall with that. So I'm expecting in some areas in Scotland to see a good 2 weeks potentially of proper wintry weather. Some areas not getting above freezing. And you look at the 2-meter dew points, getting well below freezing this time next week, potentially not returning above freezing. And look at the 2-meter temperatures, getting down to sort of 1 or 2 degrees in the day and below freezing overnight. Bitterly cold conditions, even in a city in Scotland. Rural areas, over higher ground, we always have to say it's going to be a couple of degrees colder than this. So that's why even when we're looking at London, it's 5 degrees in the day, 5, 6 degrees in the day, and sort of 1 or 2 degrees overnight. You'd think that's not that cold, really, for any properly wintry conditions. But again, these are ensemble members that are not particularly high resolution, and that is in our city where we've got urban heating. We're pretty much at sea level. Take any little bit of elevation, you take any bit of countryside, further inland, and those temperatures will plummet even more. If we do finally finish up, have a look at the ECMWF ensembles for London. Unfortunately, the first sort of 4 or 5 days has not loaded here, but generally in the longer term, you can see well below average and actually more consistency really of that sort of -6 to -8 degree level, with still some milder outliers in there and more precipitation as well. So we've got to keep an eye on those milder outliers in the longer term. They can always sneak up on us, but we'll just have to keep an eye on what happens. So anyway, thanks for watching. Bitterly cold weather coming up over the course of the next week at least, and could be prolonging and being even colder than that over the course of the next 2 weeks. Make sure you do take the necessary precautions, wrap up warm. There's going to be a risk of frost and fog in the next sort of 5 days, and then as we head into next week and the following week, there's going to be an increased risk of widespread winteriness, especially in the north and the higher ground, because it's even starting into this weekend and the start of next week, and then perhaps turning more widespread in that sort of day 10 time frame. The biggest thing about this is we've got such great consistency from the models at the moment. Sometimes with these colder spells that we do see, we get huge model volatility. We've got such great consistency at the moment. That's why we'll be able to say with quite a lot of certainty that we're going to be cold over the course of the next couple of weeks. So we'll just have to see how it does play out. But yeah, coldest start to winter, I think, since 2010. Really cold conditions coming up. Make sure you stay updated with the forecast. Of course, keep an eye on the Met Office, as I'm expecting quite a few snow and ice warnings over the course of the next couple of weeks, especially in the north, but not exclusively. We could really be going into the freezer over the course of the next weeks with persistent cold weather. So do, of course, take the necessary precautions, and I hope everyone does stay safe out there over the course of the next few weeks. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.